Hello and welcome to Good Morning UK Have Your Say, a Force for Good's mid-morning show coming to you live from our Nerve Centre here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. This is our 42nd show. We're going to be talking about what we did at the COP Carry On, which ended at the weekend there, and we're also going to be talking about our plans as an organisation in the next month or so, and we also want to hear what your thoughts are on the politics of the day. How do you think Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson are holding up? Get it off your chest, as they say. Thank you to the team, not just on TikTok but on Facebook, because on Facebook, we have had almost 2 million. We've reached almost 2 million people in the last 28 days. The figures this morning for the last 28 days were 1,856,000 people reached on our Facebook platform. So that's really, really good going. Now, if you're on Facebook, please do share this, and on Twitter, please give us a retweet, and also on YouTube as well, give us a subscribe and a thumbs up, please. Just helps to get the message out. Stephen says, hi, Alistair and Patriotic Unionist watching on all formats. I hope you're keeping well this morning, Stephen. Thanks. The COP, let's talk just briefly about the COP26 thing, the climate change clown world conference, which ended on Friday. Now, we did a week of activism there. The first week of it, we were out 4 days with our banner, which said, control the borders, not our boilers. And the point of that, of course, was to emphasise that one of the big environmental issues, which is going by the by, is, of course, border control, and the extent to which Britain's borders appear to all intents and purposes to be open, and people can literally invade, not on Viking ships like they did in the old days, not by rowing across, but just by jumping in a massive rubber dinghy, which they seem to have acquired from somewhere. You know, you can't buy those in Asda last time I looked, so where do they even get these things? So there's obviously some kind of scheme running there where they can just get all this stuff, jump into the dinghy, come across, and of course every single person who comes in has their own what's called carbon footprint, and if you're coming from a developing world into the developed world, your carbon footprint just goes through the roof as far as your impact is concerned. So if you're interested in minimising the carbon footprint of people, one of the things you would do in a country is not to have your borders wide open to everybody else. So we were trying to emphasise that point, and I think we made that point quite clear in our banner, which we hung over the motorway and which we took to the COP conference. And our picture of our banner at the COP conference outside on the Clyde Arc got almost 100,000 views on Twitter, which was really good. And then we went into town and we held it up at the Extinction Rebellion march as it was passing, and a couple of them didn't appreciate what we were doing, but too bad for them. And then the next day later we came in and we held it in Central Station, got good publicity for that, and then we went and we counted the march, which was on that Friday, which came in at 7,000. And then of course on Saturday was the big march, which they were really bumming up. The media were really bumming it up, and we've got all the cuttings here of the papers prior to it saying that there was going to be 100,000 people. Front page of the Telegraph. This is in advance of it even happening. 100,000 people, and here in the Glasgow Times, Evening Times, even saying 100,000 people, and we knew that was nonsense because that takes ages and ages and ages and ages to pass, and that would never happen because you can't get that number of people interested in this topic anyway. So we said to ourselves, we have to get in there, we have to get an exact count. So we got a great vantage point, which was able to film the march from above, and it's up there on our YouTube channel, and we wrote an article about it as well, so we'll put up the link to the article. And we were able to count the exact march on video from beginning to end, which was 2 hours and 10 minutes. And the first hour was the busiest, and then it was a little bit busier in the next half hour, and then basically the last half hour it was largely dead. Huge gaps between people, and only small groups of people going along. So in all, we counted in real time 13,000 people, which makes sense in a 2 hour march. 13,000 is what you would expect to traverse that area, and that's just literally a fact. Now, people can look at that 2 hour 10-minute video and they can count it for themselves if they want. They won't get exactly what we got, but they'll get within a 5% margin of error either way. So that's what you were looking at, and it's really, really wrong for these media companies to promote, to hype up stuff to levels which are just simply not physically possible. But of course that didn't stop the media the next day lying about it and telling us that there were in fact 100,000 at the march. For example, The Sun says that there was 100,000. The Sun the next day. The Sunday National obviously would lie, that's just a given. And similarly with the Sunday Mail, it made no attempt to try to get it right. One or two of the other more responsible media companies said things like organisers said there was 100,000. But these papers just reported it as fact, which is not appropriate journalism at all. But we did the real journalism, and we got the real figure was 13,000, which is still a lot of people. And we're not doing that. We're not pointing that out because of the actual subject matter of the march. Some of the marchers there we would agree with on some of their matters. We were just doing it to ensure that reality was reflected properly in the news, because one of the things that we really struggle with in this country is reality is not reflected properly in the news, and the mass media creates a false reality that lulls people into thinking that reality is somehow different from how they themselves sense it and experience it. And the media is just this fantasy creator, and it can create, as we've seen in the last 18 months, it can create all sorts of ideas and fantasies and promote them heavily onto many people who, unfortunately, because of their information sources, don't actually know any better. And of course, the big climate change fear is one of those things as well. Stephen says there, once it's printed, it goes down into history. People will look back and see these false headlines. That's the thing. So we thought we have to get a marker that's out there for those coming up in time who will want to know, well, what was the real figure? And unless somebody has documented the real figure, then the 100,000 lie will go down in history. Thankfully, we have documented that real history. Thanks for all the comments there on TikTok, all the good and the bad. Tell us more about reality. Yeah, okay. So one of the things that COP26 really showed as well is, and we mentioned this in our broadcast from COP26 when we were standing on the Squinty Bridge, is that it's very difficult for you and I to really know the truth of many of these scientific statements that are put out. Therefore, in order to believe it, you need to take a leap of faith. And this was brought home to us by a book that we have acquired here in the office called Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom by Patrick Moore. Now, Patrick Moore is not the Sky at Night man, who the British chap. This is a Canadian fellow who was the co-founder of Greenpeace. But he left Greenpeace when it started to go into things that were not properly tangible, i.e. going into all of the leap of faith about the planet burning and stuff like that. And he says on the back of it here, something that really struck home to me. He goes, "It dawned on me one day that most of the scare stories in the media today are based on things that are invisible, like CO2, or very remote, like polar bears and coral reefs. Thus, the average person cannot observe and verify the truth of these claims for themselves. They must rely on the activists, the media, the politicians and the scientists, all of whom have huge financial and or political interests in the subject, to tell them. This book is my effort, after 50 years as an independent scientist and environmental activist, to expose the misinformation and outright lies used to scare us and our children about the future of the Earth." So this is really, really fascinating stuff, written by the founder of Greenpeace. And if you want to know, according to the guy there on TikTok, if you want to know more about reality, this is a good place to start, because so much of what we think is real, so much of what we think has happened, didn't actually. That's the thing. It didn't actually. It's just we've been subject to the huge power of the mass media, which is getting more powerful every day. And so it's up to us to be able to build the intellectual protection which will enable us to protect ourselves from essentially the lies and the misdemeanors of the mainstream media, which have an agenda to dominate for whatever reasons. Well, COP26, what did it achieve? I think one of the sad things that it achieved was that Nicola Sturgeon has made it pretty clear now that everything that Scotland is good at, she is in fact going to be against. What am I talking about? I'm talking about, of course, fossil fuels. Scotland's good at fossil fuels. You know, we have oil fields. They're British oil fields, but they're in the Scottish area. We have lots of gas. We have lots of coal. Not that coal's coming back, but we've got tons of it. We sit on it. And we're good, of course, at agriculture. All these sorts of things are what she's now opposed to. And think about how crazy that is. Remember back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and even back in 2014, Scotland's fossil fuel capacity was something that the Scottish nationalists were really promoting and saying, look, we've got all this wealth, quite rightly, we've got all this wealth, and therefore can't we exploit it for an independent Scotland? Well, I'm afraid, guys, all of that's gone with the wind. You can't use that argument anymore. So what argument are the Scottish nationalists going to use? That's the crazy thing. And what this does as well is this has opened up a great political space for a political party that wants to say, look, we want Scotland to be economically successful within the United Kingdom by exploiting our fossil fuel resources. Imagine if the Tory party or the Labour party or the Lib Dems had the courage to take on that particular angle, because that is now an open door for them. Because Sturgeon has closed Scotland's door to fossil fuels. Sturgeon has closed Scotland's door to all that wealth, and she's done it in the name of some kind of baloney, fake invisible catastrophe. Okay, she's closed the door to Scotland's wealth. So that whole area inside that door there, that could be exploited by a political party that had the sense to do that. But unfortunately, Labour, Tory and Lib Dems have all imprisoned themselves also on this particular topic. How sad and tragic is that? Indeed, it is just scaremongering that they do. And Kenny says Sturgeon has really shot herself in the foot with the oil industry, and hasn't Hasn't she? And the Burton Brigade says, are you saying there is no climate emergency? 1,000% we're saying there is no climate emergency. That's all just fantasy, Mr. Burton. It's all just fantasy. It's just another way of the system trying to control you. There is no climate emergency. There never was. And you know what? There never will be. And I saw him trying to interview Sturgeon, and he was doing the old school thing, which is running after the politician and holding out a mic in front of her, asking her for a response, of which there came none. But I thought, that's interesting. That's the first time I've seen a journalist do that to Sturgeon, actually run up to her and ask her an awkward question and then walk alongside her, trying to get her to answer. You know, the Scottish media is just far too meek and mild to ever try that on Sturgeon. I guess they would think, well, if we do that, she's never going to talk to us again, so we've got to be her lapdog. But Tom Harwood, fair play to him, wasn't afraid of running up and doing the old school journalism thing. So good for him. Good for him, and I'm glad to hear, Richard, that he is not believing that there was 100,000 there either. And it matters hugely because as we were talking to the police officers just on the ground, you know, when we're standing about and they're asking us what we're doing and things like that, and we were just pointing out these numbers to them just to educate them as well. And we pointed out to them, you know, if your bosses are believing that there's going to be 100,000 here, think of the resources that have to be committed to try to control 100,000 people, when in fact, if you had come to us, we could have told you it's going to be between 10 and 15,000. And you could have saved a lot of money by utilising your resources in men and materials more effectively. And we would have saved the British taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds as well. You know, so they need to come to us and say, A Force for Good, what is your suggestion? What do you think the numbers are going to realistically be on this march? And we'll tell them, and we'll be correct, as we always are. I'm really enjoying this programme this morning. It's good, and all the comments coming in. The Burton Brigade says he saw that in a bar in Benidorm. Good. Well, we've got supporters out there as well. Yeah, Paul goes, Austria and Germany are going into lockdown on Monday and Scotland on Tuesday. Now, I've heard that they're going to bring in this vaccine passport scenario. They're going to even... There's already vaccine passports to get into some places in Scotland, but they're actually going to increase that. They're going to increase that and potentially stop people even going into pubs. Well, that's going to destroy the hospitality industry, because pubs and nightclubs and hospitality and restaurants, they operate on a very small margin. So if you even just get a small decrease in footfall into your pub or restaurant or nightclub or whatever, then you're going to be in big trouble. So basically, the SNP and indeed all the parties really demonstrating that they have no regard for the private entrepreneurialism in Scotland. But we've always kind of suspected that as far as the SNP is concerned. Yeah, Stephen says he almost watched the whole march and was shocked at the lack of marshals. It's a good point. I don't even remember seeing any marshals. What it was there was it wasn't, there was just lots and lots of different little groups, and they each had a wee space in between them. They didn't really have their own marshals at all. I can't remember any of the groups having marshals really. And there was a small Scottish nationalist contingent. There seemed to be two small Scottish nationalist contingents in there as well, but very small. I mean, the first one we counted 150, and the second one we counted around about 350. So very, very small groups. And there was one or two groups in there that we would agree with, you know, that were promoting things like local farming, local food, stuff like that. Absolutely. And we're very much for those sorts of organic, small-scale, local environmental activities. But as for the big, whole, fake, invisible catastrophes and threats of doom scenario, that's just silly. That's just silly. Now, yes, on this day in British history on the 17th of November. A man was born in Methil who was to become known as one of basically Scotland's and indeed Britain's most popular painters. And does anybody know who I might potentially be referring to here? I am, of course, talking about Jack Vettriano, who gets a lot of stick from the kind of the snobby artist types because his paintings are very accessible, as it were, very accessible. And let's just bring up an example of one of his paintings here. There you go. That's one of his paintings, which we really like for obvious reasons. And that painting is called "The British Are Coming." And it's from his Bluebird collection, which was one of 7 paintings which were inspired by the life and achievements of Malcolm Campbell, who gained the world land speed record back in the 1920s and 30s. And that's Jack Vettriano, who he's got that style, that kind of style that we really like. So that he was born on this day in 1951 in Methil. What else happened on this day? On the 17th of November 1877, the biggest reference library in Europe was opened in Glasgow. I'm talking about the Mitchell Library, and it's still with us, I'm glad to say. A great library. I've used it a lot. It was opened today on the 17th of November 1877. And keeping libraries open is one of the essential roles of government, I think. In Edinburgh, there's the library on George IV Bridge, and above the entrance to it, it says, "Let there be light." And I remember seeing that 30 years ago and thinking, that's an amazing statement. Let there be light, because you walk in these doors and there's all these books and there's all this information and knowledge in there. And that's the great thing about public libraries. And in our 40-page magazine, more about that in a minute, one of our policies is for the British government to directly fund libraries in Scotland in order to keep them open, because the SNP is closing them, shutting them down and shortening their hours. So one way of appealing strongly to people is to keep libraries open, and you can do that through direct funding over the tops of the SNP. If the local councils need help, they should be able to go to the British Treasury and get the required funding to keep these libraries open. Because if the SNP had their way, they would close it all down, there wouldn't be any light anymore, and we would all be plunged into darkness. To be dramatic about it, but that's really what we would be looking at. So that was also today. What else happened today? 17th of November 1895, the first Lee Enfield 303 bolt action rifle rolled off the production line at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield. And 17 million rifles later, the production line ended in 1957. And also Queen Elizabeth I acceded to the throne after her half-sister Mary died. I was looking into that last night, and Henry VIII, as we know, he certainly put himself around a bit, because Queen Mary, because when he died, it passed to Edward VI, who was his son with Jane Seymour. And then when Edward died at age 15, he didn't want to pass it on to his half-sisters, Mary or Elizabeth, so he gave it to his second cousin, Lady Jane Grey, who only ruled for 9 days until Mary came around and goes, "Oi, that's my job," and she cut off Lady Jane Grey's head, unfortunately, along with Lady Jane Grey's husband. And then so Mary became the queen, and she herself was the child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. And then when she died, it passed to her half-sister, who was the child of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, which was, of course, Edward I. So, goodness me. And then when she died, of course, it passed to the great Scotsman, King James VI, who invented the Union Jack flag, some of which you will see in the background. Anyway, a lot happening on today in British history, and we always remember British history because we're part of the BHM movement, not the BLM movement, the BHM movement, the British History Matters movement. British History Matters, and every day, especially on our Facebook and Instagram pages, we'll put up something about what happened on this day in British history in order to recall it to memory, because unless it's recalled to memory, we forget about it, and we forget about where we came from, which means we don't know why we're here, which means we don't necessarily know where we're going to go or end up. So if we can cleave to all these elements of the past, then we are better able to deal with the present, because we have a wider consciousness of how we got here and what the country that we're living in is all about. I want to talk to you about our amazing new magazine that's coming out, 40 pages. The good news is it's at the printers. It's at the printers. We spent the last 10 days really perfecting it, and it is a beauty. 40 glossy A4 full colour pages with one article per page, and it's called, and these are just the A4 pages that we were working from. It's called Do More Together. Do More Together. And that's at the printers now. That's at the printers, and we've ordered a lot of copies, and it's 40 pages. And the first 7 pages are laying down what Britain is, a unitary state and nation, talking about towards a more perfect union, what it means to be British, and Scotland is British. Our phrase, the United Kingdom, our great work of time. We've gone into some metaphysics there. You always have to have your metaphysics, especially if it's an AFFG article. Knocking federalism, we just don't support federalism, so we're getting that off the table. We're not talking about that, other than to say we're not talking about it. And then to talk about our unity mandate. And that's the index. The index page, you wait till you see it. It's amazing. And then we talk about what devolution is, so that we're all on the same table and on the same page. And we talk about how it's been set the wrong way round, that we need a conferred model, not the model that we have at the moment. The aim is ever closer union. And then we start banging into policies. No internal travel bans, annual Hollywood audit, British branding, furlough scheme, bypassing Hollywood, power of the Scotland office, how to be seen to govern, vision for British independence, the British Commonwealth, learning about Britain, educational policies, policies for students and young people, policies for the armed forces, policies for to build ships, British national flagship, British Day bank holiday, ways to celebrate the monarchy, how to support British culture, sporting elements, changing the name of the Bank of England. I mean, why is it called the Bank of England? It was nationalised in 1946. It's the British Central Bank. That's crucial. That's crucial. How to fly the Union Jack. Transport ideas, And then coming into the final half, which is what you can do, moving from observation to involvement, various ways to do that, how to help a force for good, and the last two pages. So what a cracker of a thing this is. And the good news is, if you're a union supporter, that is, if you're helping us monthly, you'll get that free. Okay, just tell us, we'll fire that off to you, you'll get that free. So it's free for all union supporters. These are the people that we depend upon. These are the people who are giving us from £1.15 a month, a week, which works out at £5 a month. They are the people that we totally depend upon. They keep our financial backbone rigid, and we send stuff to them free when we produce stuff like that. So if you're a union supporter, you'll get that free. So that's fantastic. That's at the printers. So we may have it for next Wednesday. Just depends how fast they can turn it around. But it's so important that we do stuff like that, because in the National this week, and we read the National so that you don't have to, they were saying that they're printing off 1 million copies. So they say, right? So they say 1 million copies of some kind of indie paper, which they're going to give to their various SNP groups and other people like that, who are going to like put it through your letterbox. And who knows if they're going to print off 1 million, because they always like to, again, they always bum it up, but they'll certainly be printing a few thousand anyway. But a few thousand too many, because we don't really need that sort of division circulating in our society. So if you would like to ensure that things like our positive message of solidarity and unity get out there, then please do become a union supporter. And as I say, it's black and white at the moment. That's just because that's the draft that we printed off. The actual magazine is full colour, and it's like, just, you look at it and it's like awesome. The colour. It's the most colourful Scottish Unionist document ever produced in the history of the world, or indeed the universe. Well, James makes a good point. The SNP was always anti-EU. When did they change their view to pro-EU? Well, when the contrarians. So when the British Parliament was for the EU, the SNP were against it. And then latterly, when some people in the Parliament started being against it, the SNP changed their tune and became for it. They really just put the finger up to the wind and find out which way the wind is blowing on many of these things. You struggle to find logic among a lot of the things that the Scottish Nationalists will do. I think they thought it would make them look more cosmopolitan or something like that if they pretended that they were for the European Union. But now that we're out of the European Union, they're never really going to be able to make a proper case for it, because as we say in our new magazine here, I mean, they really have to make a case for us to join the EU, to join the euro, the struggling euro. They're going to have to make a case for us to throw our lot in with the European Central Bank. They're going to have to make a case for us to open our borders again. They're going to have to make a case for us to give away our fishing and agricultural policies back to the EU. So all of these things are surely very, very difficult for them to do. So I think their goose has been cooked by Brexit, really, because it's going to be beyond them to really try to make a positive case to join the EU. And of course there's no consistency there when they say that they want to break away from one union in order to join another union. There's no consistency when they say they want to break away from the union that they depend upon the most, which is of course the British Union, in order to join a union that they do less trade with. None of that makes any sense. It only makes sense when you see it from the position that they are actually just opposed for various reasons to the rest of the United Kingdom. And you know, there's we actually put the figures in here, that the European Union is 7 times the size of the UK market in theory, but the United Kingdom, the rest of the United Kingdom, is the destination for 3 times as many Scottish products as go to the EU. So we trade far more with the rest of the United Kingdom than we do with the European Union, even though the European Union is a lot bigger. And of course we do, because we're trading with people who are literally just down the road. They're not thousands of miles away. So the UK will always be, the rest of the UK will always be Scotland's biggest destination for our goods and services. That's always going to be the case. So we've always got to, just from an economic perspective even, we've always got to maintain that strong internal market and not break it, which is what we would be doing if we had to join the European Union, setting up all sorts of trading barriers at the border with the rest of the United Kingdom. A terrible thing that we shouldn't have to do at all. And we have confidence that common sense will prevail at the end of the day. We have confidence that that will be the case. The important thing about the Union is its age. It's how long it's been here is a good indicator of how long it's going to continue to be here. It doesn't get less secure as the time goes by. It should get more secure as the time goes by. You know, that's what we even talk about, the concept of ever closer union. And it makes more sense to see the United Kingdom as on a journey towards ever closer union, not on a journey towards separation. And when we frame it in that way, then all sorts of policies become possible. And Dale makes an interesting point. He says that as an English person, he doesn't feel that Westminster represents him properly. Well, I totally get what you're saying, Dale. Many of us at this precise moment don't believe that Westminster's representing us very well. Don't imagine that Unionists think that everything is hunky-dory in the kitchen. It's not necessarily so. I mean, we believe fundamentally in our British institutions, but that means that we hold them to high standards and we want them to often do better than they're doing at the moment. And I totally get what you're saying, Dale, when you say you don't feel represented. Many of us feel almost betrayed, in a sense, by the institution at the moment. That doesn't mean it's always going to be like this, though. It can get better. I mean, it is not properly representing many of us as far as all this carry on with climate change nonsense is concerned, as well as all the COVID lockdowns, as well as the open borders on the south coast of England. All of these things are not properly representing the British people, and Westminster has fallen down on those things, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be any better if all the different countries go their separate ways. It's just going to be worse. I mean, here in Scotland, it'll be 1,000 times worse because, you know, the SNP welcome all those things. The SNP welcome open borders. The SNP welcome, the destruction of Scotland's fossil fuel industry. And the SNP has shown itself very clearly to be very totalitarian-minded as far as things like these vaccine passports are concerned. So we believe in the British institutions, but we do hold our politicians to account, and we do try to think, how can they do better? And we do try to hold them to better standards. But I totally understand when you say you don't feel represented, but would you be represented any better in like an English parliament? That's the question. And we would doubt it, because an English parliament will just go the same way as a Scottish one did. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back next Wednesday. Now, we may or may not have our amazing magazine back from the printers. I hope we do. We'll certainly have it in time. December's coming along, where we'll have our Yo Britannia Christmas crowdfunder. And we'll also have our 10-hour union telethon. So that will be a treat, especially for folks on TikTok who can listen to A Force for Good for 10 hours, guys. 10 hours. And we'll have lots of guests on as well. And if you'd like to be a guest on our union telethon, do contact us. So folks, it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the Queen. See you next week.